Investors are quietly buying while everyone else waits for a crash. News.com.au, banks predict bad news for homeowners. The Courier Mail, shock as cities' distressed home listings surge. Daily Telegraph, Sydney home prices to plummet. It's all doom and gloom again. The news can't help them. I call it the CNN, the Crisis News Network, are getting in there once again, telling us how bad things are. We export gas around the world, so we should be like Omar, where you get gas for next to nothing. However, we pay more for gas than just about any other country, even though we're the biggest reserves in the world. During COVID, we became one of the richest nations in the world with the most amount of savings out of any country. So if you look at the average Australian, they got more savings than any other person in the world on average. But since then, our standard of living, our real household disposable income per capita has gone down. Hello, this is George Markowski and Christina Markowski coming to you live for Money for Life podcast, here with our group and also in the Facebook group. If you're watching live, type in hashtag live, and all these people watching the replay, type in hashtag replay. Now, what we're talking about tonight is there's talk of a crash, and what I want to address tonight really is investors are quietly buying while everyone else waits for a crash, right? So if you're listening to this and you're sitting on the sidelines, well, while investors are actually going in there and picking up bargains at the moment. So there's two types of investors in the world, and what's happening at the moment, because we almost entered a recession, our GDP, our gross domestic product hasn't had much increase. There's been a lot of talk. I'll just read a few articles here of what people are saying, okay? Not people, the news article. Okay, news.com.au, banks predict bad news for homeowners. The Courier Mail, shock as cities' distressed home listings surge. Daily Telegraph, Sydney home prices to plummet. It's all doom and gloom again. The news can't help them. I call it the CNN, the Crisis News Network, are getting in there once again, telling us how bad things are. Funny enough, now there's a lot of people watching right now who are just now frozen and shitting themselves, and they're scared. So if you are, keep watching, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about what's really happening and why you should ignore the hype. But not only that, I'm going to show you what the wealthy investors are doing to take advantage of this, but also the things you need to avoid to make sure you don't miss out on this boom. Because there's more to it than just jumping in and hoping for the best with no parachute. You need to really do it properly. And what I want to discuss is why prices are going up, even though there's a said recession, but also why Anthony Albanese is your best friend if you're an investor and he's pushing property prices up. I'm also going to touch on Melbourne and the economy in Melbourne and what's been happening with the Labor government. They've been doing a wonderful job there, and they've got the biggest deficit ever.
I was going to say, is that sarcasm I detect?
Yes, but also I want to discuss the trade war, Trump, and a bit of a tell the politicians what they should be doing. Because we've got an opportunity now to renegotiate, and we're not very good at negotiating here in Australia. So stay to the end and watch that. I'm going to share my screen and start doing and do the State of the Nation and explain to you what's happening. And then we're going to go to our private group where we're going to do Q&A. And okay, State of the Nation. Albo deliver his promise, falling living standards, right? So basically, Albanese stressed that pushing a bigger agenda too soon could risk losing voter support. So have a look at this. Albo deliver the promise of falling living standards. Look at utility prices, the CPI, right? They've gone right up. So the thing is, one thing about Australia, we export gas around the world. So we should be like Omar, where you get gas for next to nothing. However, we pay more for gas than just about any other country, even though we're the biggest reserves in the world. It's just ridiculous. And the challenge with energy, whenever you've got expensive energy in a country, it affects everything you do. So what it does, it affects transport, it affects when you're creating things and things like that. Talk about manufacturing, I could hear the villa next door getting worked on at the moment. So we've got this grinder in the background. Hopefully you can't hear it. So his housing target We've been 60,000 short every year of the housing target, as you can see. And that's part of his promises. The real household disposable income per capita has gone down. So during COVID, we became one of the richest nations in the world with the most amount of savings out of any country. So if you look at the average Australian, they've got more savings than any other person in the world on average. But since then, our standard of living, our real household disposable income per capita has gone down. And you look at Australia, we're in the blue. And if you look at the graph in Australia, funny enough, a lot of countries, their income per capita went up 2021.
Yeah.
Went down. But you look at Australia, we've gone right down.
Why did it go up and down? In 2021, it sort of peaked, and now 2025, it's like back to what it was in 2015.
Yes. So we had the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And what happened was the governments did a lot of stimulus, put money back into the economy. Interest rates went down.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when interest rates go down? Your disposable income goes up because you're not spending as much on interest.
Ah, that's why there was that big peak.
Yeah, so interest rates, what interest rates do, interest rates actually stimulate the economy and get everyone spending money and doing things. You put interest rates up, and what you're doing is slowing down the economy. So the RBA has been putting them up and now slowly putting them down because we haven't had much stimulus for the economy, right? I personally think it's a blunt tool, right? And I'd rather just have the low interest rates and keep the economy going no matter what, right?
All it does is put pressure on the Australian household. It's crazy.
Yes, but when you put pressure on the Australian household, you reduce spending. So you reduce inflation, which reduces the economy. It's a very old school way of thinking. And me personally, I think it's a very blunt instrument that doesn't work too well. So now look at Australia's manufacturing. We've almost deindustrialized as a country, right? You look at Australia, we're right at the bottom there on the left-hand side of the graph. And this is the first world countries. You know, we're looking at USA, Norway, places like that. Now, deindustrialization is not such a bad thing as long as you've got startups, you've got AI, you've got computers and things like that to take over, because obviously they're higher level and better money. And one thing is Australia's actually done quite well when it comes to the startup scene, but we could do better. But so we've got the lowest share of R&D spending among developed economies, which is sad because R&D is so important. Because what you spend in R&D now affects you in years to come.
Oh, look at Korea.
Look at Israel.
Yeah.
Right? Their R&D is crazy. I'd imagine a lot of it's to do with weapons, but they've got a lot of R&D. Right? And Korea as well. So you look at Korea.
Yeah.
They've got the North Korea thing, and Israel have got
to do with weapons too. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But also they're moving into a high-tech economy.
Mm-hmm.
And to have a high-tech economy, you need R&D. And R&D is very, very... Now, let's talk about Victorian government. Now, Labor's first budget after being...
What is R&D? Research and development.
Yeah, research and development. Now, let's have a little dig at the Labor government in Melbourne. I can't help myself, but have a look at this. Labor's first budget after being elected. Have a look at this 2015, right?
Okay.
Down here, the graph, Labor's first budget, Victorian net debt. Now, look what's happened since Labor came in and where it's gone. Gone through the roof. It's huge. Victoria net debt per capita. Look at that.
Wow.
It's gone crazy. It's the highest state in Australia. Victorian interest expenses now, right? This is millions annually. So 10,000 million is $10 billion per year, just in interest. So if you think your home loan's expensive, you should see the Victorian interest rate expenses. Also, Victorians paid $6,348 in state and local taxes per person in 2023-24, right? So a lot, $654 more than the national average. Since 2021, the taxes have gone up 40.5%. And that's all partly to do with their amazing policy where they shut down the whole place for 2 years and no one could make any money. So look at Victoria, how it compares to other states. So debt burden percentage, right? Victoria is 22%, Queensland is 1.1%.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, so Victoria's just like double everyone else.
Interesting. So SA's got the second amount of debt burden.
Yep, 13%.
Hmm.
Still, it's half what Victoria is.
Still good compared to Victoria, exactly.
That's right, exactly. Right. And then they put other taxes on different things. And what's happened, they followed a 15% hike on berthing fees, and now Carnival Cruises pulled out of Melbourne. And they were bringing a lot of tourists to Melbourne.
Yeah, I saw all the cruise ships move around in Melbourne. Thought that was very interesting, looking at Port Melbourne.
Yeah. So Australia must not cede to Trump on trade. See, Australia-US Free Trade Agreement, called the Auss FTA, was signed in 2005. And basically, it was a terrible deal for Australia, but a good deal for America. And now, because what's happened is America, because they're the big player, they're always trying to get the best deal, right?
Mhm.
But you got to look at here. You look at this, the chart of Australia. We got a substantial trade deficit with the US, right? Which means that we send them a lot more money and take a lot of stuff from them. And what you want to do is you want to try to keep this balanced. As a whole, Australia are really good, and we've got a massive trade surplus with the world because we're selling all our resources. But what needs to happen is we need to move into higher tech and start exporting tech. So that way we can have a sustainable future.
Mhm.
Or do what Norway did, and they're taxing a lot of their resources, putting that to a big fund and investing in the biggest companies all around Australia, all around the world. And now they've got the biggest fund in the world doing that. So they own Norway people, they own most of the companies in the world, right? So you look at what we export to USA, beef, which has gone up, and then we've got aluminium and steel, which they want to put
I'm
a
really surprised that we export beef, considering all the massive farms they have over there.
yeah, Australian beef is high quality, right? Also, Australian beef, Europe won't accept a lot of American beef, neither will Australia, because the quality is not there for some reason. I'm not an expert on that.
Australia's got higher standards.
Maybe when it comes to that, Europe's got pretty high standards. But then again, they did have mad cow disease, so who knows? Now, America want us to increase our spending on defense as well if we want to do a trade deal with Trump. So they think we're not spending enough on defense. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with spending money on defense, but something that works. And at the moment, with our submarines and all the deals we're doing, all we're doing is losing money and doing bad deals.
Been hearing about the submarines for the past 10 years.
Yeah, we don't have any. Now, look at this, right? So the financial markets see a 97% chance that the Reserve Bank will cut interest rates at its July meeting.
Bring it on.
They're locked and loaded.
Great. Can't happen
And
soon enough.
after the last interest rate cut, auction clearance rates went up,
Of course they
right?
did.
Which means the housing market launched straight afterwards. Now, there has been a small drop in the market since we were announced with the recession. But I think what's going to happen in July, there's a 97% chance in July, we're going to have a resurge and back again. We're going to be back on.
Next boom.
Yeah. So look, there's a bit of negative news about Victoria, but all in all, they're just poor compared to the rest of Australia. They're still doing actually really well when it comes to world standards, and it's also a good place to buy property still, regardless if they tax everyone a lot more, right? Because it's still a good place to invest. But just something to keep in mind. Probably not a good place to do business. The highest tax for businesses. South Australia, we used to be the worst, but we're slowly improving finally.
That's great.
We were stagnating for a very, very long. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is there's a few other things that I want to discuss with our group, but it's sort of secret and I can't tell the people on the public channel. Is I'm going to talk about some of the other investments that I'm doing and talk a little bit insider stories. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the live stream. Everyone watching the live stream, thank you so much. If you want to take advantage of the property market, type in #boom and my team will reach out to you. Now we're going to go to a private group and talk real talk. Thank you.